Europe, once the world's center, a continent whose empires shaped history, whose cities were the beating heart of culture, science, and politics, now finds itself at a turning point. For centuries, Europe's influence stretched across continents, its capitals bustling with innovation and ambition. Today, however, the people of Europe face a profound question that will shape their future and the future of generations to come. After decades of living under the protective umbrella of American military power, Europe must now confront a new and uncertain reality. The post-war order that guaranteed peace and prosperity is no longer assured. The idea of a Europe without U.S. security guarantees was once unthinkable, almost a taboo. But today, it's a mainstream debate in parliaments, newsrooms, and living rooms across the continent. Recent shifts in American foreign policy, growing isolationism, and a world marked by new crises have forced Europe to reconsider its place in the global order. The old certainties are fading, replaced by urgent questions about defense, alliances, and identity. Can Europe truly stand on its own, taking responsibility for the security and well-being of its 450 million citizens? The answer is far from clear, and the stakes could not be higher. For decades, Europe has grown comfortable outsourcing its security to Washington, freeing up resources to invest in world-class social welfare, healthcare, and education. This model has delivered prosperity and stability, but it has also bred a sense of complacency. Now, as the geopolitical landscape shifts and new threats emerge, Europe must face the consequences of this long-standing reliance. The continent is being forced to ask itself tough questions about its own capabilities and resolve. Meeting this challenge will require more than just increased military spending. It demands a fundamental shift in strategic culture, a willingness to take risks, make sacrifices, and forge a new path forward. Will Europe become little more than a wealthy museum, admired for its past but irrelevant to the future? Or will it rise to the occasion, forging true strategic autonomy and a renewed sense of purpose? The answer to this dilemma will define not just the 21st century for Europe, but also the balance of power and stability for the entire world. A strong, united Europe could become a vital partner for global stability, helping to address challenges from climate change to conflict resolution, and shaping a more peaceful international order. The continent stands at a crossroads. Its next steps will echo far beyond its borders, carrying consequences for allies, rivals, and the world at large. The choice Europe makes now will shape the destiny of nations for decades to come. To truly grasp Europe's security dilemma, we must journey back to the aftermath of World War II, a time when the continent was left devastated, its cities reduced to rubble, and its people struggling to rebuild their shattered lives. The scars of war ran deep, both physically and emotionally, leaving nations wary of future conflict and desperate for lasting peace. The continent lay in ruins, its great powers exhausted, economies crippled, and governments unable to guarantee even basic security for their citizens. The devastation was so widespread that no single European nation could hope to restore stability on its own. In this vacuum, a new era emerged, defined by the rise of two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Their influence would shape the fate of Europe for decades to come, dividing the continent into spheres of influence and igniting the Cold War. Determined to prevent another catastrophic war, European leaders made a bold choice. They decided to bind their nations together, forging alliances and institutions that would make future conflict not only undesirable, but nearly impossible. The European Coal and Steel Community, established in 1951, was a groundbreaking step. By pooling control over key war resources, coal and steel, member states ensured that no single country could secretly rearm, making large-scale conflict between them unthinkable. This pragmatic beginning laid the foundation for what would become the European Union, an unprecedented project that fostered peace, economic growth, and cooperation across the continent. While Europe focused on building its common market and institutions, the United States stepped in to provide military protection through NATO, shielding Western Europe from external threats and the looming shadow of the Soviet Union. This allowed European nations to concentrate on trade, diplomacy, and rebuilding their societies, while relying on American military might to deter aggression and maintain stability. As a result, Europe experienced an unprecedented economic boom. Factories roared back to life, markets flourished, and living standards soared, all without the crushing burden of full defense costs. For the first time in generations, Europeans enjoyed peace and prosperity on a grand scale, a luxury that few other regions in the world have ever known. This unique transatlantic relationship, built on a careful division of labor between economic integration and military protection, became the cornerstone of Europe's post-war order and a model for international cooperation. The Cold War was a defining era for Europe, shaping not only its borders but also its destiny for generations. As tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union escalated, the continent found itself at the very heart of a global standoff. The ideological battle between East and West was not just a distant conflict, it was a daily reality for millions of Europeans. During this period, Europe's reliance on American military power became deeply entrenched. U.S. troops, tanks, and bases dotted the landscape, serving as both a deterrent and a reassurance to Western European nations. Europe was the front line in a global ideological struggle, where the threat of conflict was ever present and the stakes could not have been higher. The Iron Curtain was more than a metaphor. It was a physical and psychological barrier that split the continent. On one side stood the democratic West, on the other the communist East, each with its own vision for the future. NATO nations, led by the United States, formed a collective defense against the Soviet threat, while Warsaw Pact countries fell under Moscow's strict control. This division defined European politics and security for decades. The American military presence was not just symbolic, it was essential. Thousands of U.S. troops were stationed in West Germany and across Western Europe, ready to respond at a moment's notice. Any Soviet attack on Western Europe would have triggered immediate and massive U.S. involvement, making the stakes of any confrontation unimaginably high. This powerful deterrent, backed by nuclear weapons and constant vigilance, kept the Cold War from turning hot in Europe, preserving a fragile peace. Even after the Soviet Union collapsed, NATO did not fade away. Instead, it expanded eastward, with the United States remaining the cornerstone of European security. The violent breakup of Yugoslavia and the Balkan conflicts of the 1990s only reinforced Europe's dependence on American intervention, as European nations struggled to manage crises on their own. It was American air power that ultimately ended the wars in Bosnia and Kosovo, highlighting the limits of Europe's ability to act independently in times of crisis. Through it all, the United States remained the indispensable security provider, its military presence a constant shield against instability. In the end, Europe's ultimate survival and security rested not just on its own efforts, but in the enduring partnership and protection offered by allies across the Atlantic. The 9/11 attacks reshaped the transatlantic security alliance. NATO invoked Article 5, defending the U.S. for the first time. European allies joined the U.S.-led coalition in Afghanistan. However, the 2003 Iraq invasion exposed divisions within NATO. The U.S. focus shifted to counterterrorism and the Middle East. Europe, while a partner, was no longer the central focus of U.S. security policy. This shift led to underinvestment in European military capabilities. The 2014 annexation of Crimea by Russia was a wake-up call. Conventional warfare threats returned to Europe's doorstep. The U.S. led the response, reaffirming its role as Western alliance leader. Europe's reliance on the U.S. was highlighted once again. Europe's defense landscape is complex and uneven. France and the UK are significant military powers with nuclear capabilities. Germany, historically hesitant, is now investing in military modernization. Eastern countries like Poland are increasing defense spending due to Russian threats. Southern Europe faces different priorities, complicating a unified strategy. Europe's defense spending is inefficient, with massive duplications. Lack of standardization hinders effective joint operations. Europe operates dozens of weapon systems, unlike the U.S. streamlined approach. This patchwork is Europe's greatest military weakness. Without American leadership, European forces struggle to fight together. Europe remains a collection of parts, not a cohesive force. Recent U.S. political trends suggest a reduced commitment to European security. A significant reduction in U.S. military presence would create a security vacuum. NATO's military credibility would diminish without U.S. capabilities. Europe's ability to conduct large-scale operations would be crippled. Economically, Europe would need a massive military buildup. Defense spending would rise, forcing difficult political and economic choices. Social programs would face cuts to fund defense, an unpopular move. A U.S. withdrawal could trigger a crisis of confidence within Europe. Old rivalries and divergent interests could re-emerge. Europe might fracture instead of uniting to face new realities. A less secure Europe would be less prosperous, with geopolitical instability. The American security guarantee has been Europe's glue. Without it, Europe faces a challenging future. European strategic autonomy faces economic challenges. Building an independent military force is costly. Investments in strategic transport, cyber defense, and missile systems are needed. European economies face high debt, aging populations, and slow growth. Defense spending would require cuts to social programs, a tough sell. Europe's fragmented defense industry leads to wasteful duplication. Consolidation is needed but faces resistance from national governments. The US outspends Europe on defense R&D, maintaining a technological edge. Europe must pool resources for ambitious military technology projects. Initiatives like the Future Combat Air System are steps forward. Political disagreements and delays challenge these projects. Europe faces two main schools of thought for its future. France champions strategic autonomy, developing independent military capabilities. Germany and others prefer strategic responsibility within NATO. The goal is to strengthen, not replace, the US partnership. The tension between these visions will shape European defense. Europe must take more responsibility for its security. More spending, cooperation, and integration are needed. A stronger Europe is in America's strategic interest. Achieving balance requires unprecedented political unity. The EU has moved forward through crises before. The current security crisis could catalyze Europe's geopolitical role. Europe faces its most significant test since the Cold War. The era of easy peace under US security is over. Europe must become a political and military force. Strategic autonomy and responsibility are both needed. Europe must act independently when necessary, strengthening the alliance. A stronger European pillar within NATO ensures US engagement. This requires a revolution in strategic thinking and real investment. Germany must embrace its role as a security provider. France must embed its ambitions within a European framework. Smaller states must trust a more powerful European defense. The alternative is a weak, divided, and vulnerable Europe. Europe's leaders must seize this moment to stand on their own.